Hi there, higher running coach and Hoke athlete, Canaday here with another training talk. This is a personal analysis, and I do apologize a little bit of a clickbaity title, not gonna lie there, but I do want to be honest and transparent with you. And for those of you that don't know me, who might be new here, I've been running for a long time, 25 years of any service, any distance running. Started pretty seriously, training pretty hard at a young age, running 100 miles a week, 160K a week by the age of 20, running marathons by the age of 21. And then getting into mountain ultra trail running. But then 2 years ago, I had a bilateral pulmonary embolism, which means both of my lungs had substantial blood clots in them for like 5 weeks. It did some damage. I got some lung tissue, and I've been doing a lot of medical tests over the last year because my breathing has felt a lot different ever since the pulmonary embolism. And you know, I am getting older now. I am 37 years old. So we're talking about Vo2max though in this talk. And Vo2max, if you don't know, I've done a lot of videos in the last 15 years on this YouTube channel about Vo2max, Vo2max training. It's actually the name of this channel, basically, Vo2max Productions. But basically, it's a gold standard. It's the maximum oxygen consumption, oxygen delivery we're talking about. And generally, having a really high Vo2max is generally always good. To be an elite athlete in a lot of sports, they'll say like, oh, your Vo2max should be like over 70 for a guy. That's not always the case, but generally, you know, you hear big numbers out of guys like, you know, Kilian Jornet or Steve Prefontaine back in the days, like, you know, in the 80s, or cross-country skiers or some professional cyclists. Cross-country skiers especially, though, because they can engage more of their musculature with the arms. But, you know, cyclists, you hear these big numbers, 80, 90, those are really high Vo2max values. It's basically like if your body was a car, it's like the horsepower. So if you could rev up that engine, it could really help. Now, there's a limitation to that because it's generally more specific to higher intensity, right? 100% max heart rate. You know, you're thinking of running like a 5K all out or a 3K all out. So, you know, people are like, well, does it really matter for ultramarathon events? You know, these 20-hour races, UTMB, or, you know, a long cycling event or an Ironman or something like that. And it actually does. They've done some studies in ultra running, and actually Coach Sandy and I at Higher Running, in our Higher Running podcast, we talked about some of the scientific data showing a correlation, very high correlation of velocity at Vo2max, which is the pace you could hold at Vo2max, and how that might translate to a long distance ultra race, even something mountainous and extreme like UTMB. But the velocity does take into account your running form and mechanics and musculature, and I'll get into that in a bit. But Vo2max values, you know, you could generally estimate them sometimes based on a 5K race performance, or even, you know, the watches, GPS watches, fancy watches, smart watches will try to estimate it based on your heart rate, your training, your age, your body weight. You know, it could give a ballpark estimate usually pretty well, especially with a recent race performance, be it a marathon or a 5K. But it's just guessing. So to get the real Vo2max number, you usually have to go to a lab, and you have to pull out a very hard test, 100%, you know, you're going for 100% max heart rate, and you're holding it, hopefully holding that 100% max heart rate for several minutes. So mentally, that's very tough. But the important thing with the Vo2max test is you need a lot of equipment, is the protocol, and we call it the ramp, or how they increase the effort of the test while you're in the lab. And that's really the meat of my talk, besides explaining to you why my Vo2max is basically, according to the lab studies, dropped off a cliff. Now, you know, it's a clickbaity title. I say, oh, my Vo2max used to be 69 in the lab. Now it's, you know, 45. Is that really true? Well, that's why I'm doing this talk. But I was measured, and this was a while ago. Vo2max generally drops with age, so that's an important consideration, especially if you've been training at a high level like myself. You know, I get tested back in 2017 in the lab in CU Boulder with Shalea Kipp, an Olympian. She was teammates with Emma Coburn, actually ran in the 3K steeplechase in the Olympics. Great exercise scientist, great mind. She was doing a study. I was part of a larger study. It was mainly fairly elite runners. We had to be in like sub 32, 31 minute 10K shape at altitude, basically. But one of the protocols of the test was to do an all-out Vo2max test. They did some other stuff with lactate values and running economy, and I won't get into that. But Vo2max test, the ramp protocol was very good in this test because A, it was on a treadmill, and I'm a runner, and that's important. We're going to talk about that in a bit. But keep in mind, this is when I was in my early 30s compared to now in my late 30s. So, you know, as you get older, if you're a newer runner, beginner runner, maybe you're still increasing your Vo2max as you get older. But generally, if you've been running and training really hard for a long time, your Vo2max might actually go down as you get into your 30s or 40s. Max heart rate also kind of goes down too. So, you know, it's something that you peak at kind of earlier, usually in your running career or in your 20s even, probably in my case. But anyway, Vo2max test ramp protocol was that she got the belt moving at about 6-minute mile pace. So it was 10 miles an hour, 16 kilometers per hour. And it started out flat. Now every minute the ramp, the treadmill went up on incline 1% grade. So that got intense pretty quickly. And the goal is usually to get you to Vo2max before 8 minutes, 10 minutes in, but more than 5 or 6 minutes in. So, you know, it's warmed up, ready to go, 6-minute mile pace on the flat, not too bad. You know, this is at altitude in Boulder, 5,200 feet, about 1,600 meters. But, you know, I could hold 6-minute mile pace for a pretty long time. It's way slower than my marathon pace. But anyway, that cranks up to, you know, 5% grade, 6% grade at 10 miles an hour, 16K. Things start getting real intense real quick. And so you can see me at the end of the test there, I'm pushing as hard as I can. I think I got up around 7-8% grade, and you know the heart rate's been climbing steadily. And that's what's very important with Vo2max tests is you need to have an incremental increase like that. So you're not sprinting around a track all out, you know, 400 meters, you're going to get flooded with lactate right away. Or if you're on an exercise bike, right, you start spinning 400 watts. Well, that's not going to last very long for most people because your muscles will flood with lactate. You'll go anaerobic within a minute, right? But Vo2max test, you want to be able to suffer for, you know, 6, 7, 8 minutes. And that's why it correlates very well with doing an all-out time trial of 3 kilometers for a lot of people. For an elite, maybe 5 kilometers. If you could run a 5K well under 15 minutes. But anyway, you're spending that time with the Vo2max. I was measured at 69 about, maybe 68.7, give or take. And, you know, that's one value. It's pretty high. It's well above average, but I was training pretty well, and I was in my mid-30s, competing a lot in ultramarathon races and still running fairly fast marathon times. You know, I just got 16th place at Boston a year before that, 8th place in the U.S. Marathon Championships with some sub-220 marathons type of fitness level. So, you know, I was in good shape. That was a good value for me. And now, granted, it is 5-6 years later, getting a Vo2max test again in a different protocol, more in a hospital setting, totally different. They're testing me because I had my pulmonary embolism. I've had blood flow problems in my lungs with the clots, but then residual scar tissue, and they're checking for different things because my breathing mechanics feel very off. And a couple of the tests I had recently in the last year in the hospital, the first one was on a stationary bike. So that's already kind of a limitation there. I'm not a cyclist, so my leg muscles kind of poop out before I could really get in a good effort, and that's a limiting factor. So that's why, and we'll pull up the test results here. You can see the numbers. It's like 44, 43, 45 is my Vo2max now, which they say, oh, you know, congratulations. That's what an average person your age who doesn't exercise, that's an average Vo2max value. And I'm like, great, I'm supposed to be an athlete in shape, and my Vo2max is the average of someone who doesn't exercise, who's 37 years old. So it was very humbling and sad to see. But in this test, and again, this is part of the limitation, you know, they hook you up to a mask. It's very uncomfortable. It's hot. You're not totally warmed up. A stationary bike, already the mechanics are different. They also had a catheter inserted in an artery, in my radial artery, in my wrist. So I have this like splint on my arm there, you could see. And there's blood spurting out sometimes. They're taking blood draws every minute. They're taking my blood pressure. You got the blood pressure cuff on. You basically have an EKG all over your chest. So a lot of wires and stuff going on there with the mask. And they clip your nose. So you're hooked up to a tube, a computer. Sometimes you can't pull out that 100% effort. That's going to limit your Vo2max numbers. So, the fact that I was on a bike, the fact that, there's all this uncomfortable stuff going on, I wasn't amped up. I wasn't in great shape either. I haven't been training, the 100-mile training weeks that I've been doing in the past when I had that Vo2max test with Kip in Boulder. So there's a certain detraining effect going on there as well. Now, you can say, Sage, this is horrible. Like, you're competing at a level where your Vo2max just dropped off a cliff. And, I got another test actually more recently in the last couple of months. They're actually testing me for vocal cord dysfunction and abnormal breathing patterns. So they stuck a tube down my throat, or a camera, looking at my vocal cords while I breathe. And this test was done on a treadmill. So better protocol, you would think, but it was a hot, stuffy room. I got a tube down my throat, trying not to gag, and they're trying to get me to take deep breaths every minute. I'm doing a Vo2max test. The ramp protocol on the treadmill test, you would think would be better for me again, because I'm a runner, I'm not a cyclist, right? If you're a cyclist, you want to do a cycling Vo2max test. If you're a cross-country skier, you could do like a Nordic type of test, right? There's different things for different movement patterns. But anyway, the ramp protocol for this Vo2max test, and granted it was in Denver, so similar altitude to Boulder, was that the treadmill was flat, and I'm hooked up to these machines, and there's a lot going on. There's stuff jiggling around, and they just increase the speed every minute. They start at like 6 miles an hour, and then it goes up to 12. It maxed out at 12 miles an hour, and I was very determined to max out that treadmill at 12 miles an hour, 5-minute mile pace, because that's what I used to be able to run almost for a full marathon, low 5-minute miles. But at altitude in this hot, stuffy room with a tube down my throat, I'm working pretty hard, even running 6-minute mile pace or 10 miles an hour, 16K per hour on this rinky-dink treadmill. Now in this Vo2max test, they even had me even lower. I think you could look at the numbers and the data there. 42, 43 only on the Vo2max number, so super low. But it's worth noting my max heart rate only got up to 160. That's not my true max heart rate. I know I could push over that. I've been doing treadmill workouts here in Salida where I'm getting into the 160s. It's definitely over my lactate threshold now. I have a relatively lower max heart rate maybe, but that's another consideration, is if you're not pulling out 100% max heart rate and you're not doing things really well, are you going to really know what your Vo2max is? And I'm going to say probably not. And a lot of people don't even know their max heart rate, because these tests have to be very specific with the ramp protocol. And why does it really matter? Well, at the end of the day, Vo2max is a rough indicator of potential performance, especially if you want to be an elite. But, I could still have the advantage of my musculature. I still have strong legs from all the years I've been running. I get aches and pains too, but like, if you have that efficiency in your technique and your form, and you're smart with your nutrition and hydration, you could still make up a lot of ground on people in long distance races. And that factors into what we call your running economy or efficiency. So if your efficiency is really good, it could kind of make up for slightly lower Vo2max numbers. So, my Vo2max might be, I think it's still a little higher than 45 or 42. But even if it's in the 50s only, still slightly above average, I could still pull out some of that running economy and musculature with just my experience level to race at a slightly higher level. How much higher, I don't know, but that's some of the limitations of Vo2max studies, especially when you see them in these hospital settings where people are on stationary bikes and they're not used to pedaling, and you're not pulling out that 100% max heart rate, you're not getting to true Vo2max. The numbers can be misleading, and I wouldn't estimate them on a smartwatch either. So real race performances in the real world are what matter, and pushing yourself to reach new potential or to maximize your potential where you're at is really the name of the game. And that's what I'm trying to do as I get older with my health issues. Still pushing, still being smart with nutrition, hydration. Pacing is a huge one, obviously, with race performance. So that's kind of an explanation of the journey and why Vo2max numbers could be misleading, and why I misled you maybe with a clickbaity thumbnail thing. But I wanted to talk about the science, and I want to be transparent with you guys, because I really appreciate all the support and outreach, especially after my last race vlog. And there's going to be more training stuff coming your way, more training talks. I want to help anyone on any surface, any distance, at any level. So really appreciate all the support. Shout out to title sponsor Hoka, keeping the dream alive, as well as check out our training plans, our courses. We have an online course, but also all our training plans at higherrunning.com. We sell training plans for any surface, any distance, comprehensive training guide. Comes with a lot of tips and these workouts for road, but also ultra trail. So Coach Sandy and I developed those. Check it out, higherrunning.com. Give us a follow on social media. We send out newsletters with free tips. Thank you so much for all your support, the Patreon supporters, keeping this channel alive, subscribing on here. Hope you're doing well, and stay tuned for more Vo2max Productions.